Your newsfeed is probably filled with polls, color-coded graphics of swing states, soundbites of last-minute appeals. As America votes blue versus red, left versus right, what is truly at stake in this 2024 election? It's still the superpower. So what does this election between current Vice President Kamala Harris against former President Donald Trump mean for Americans and the world? But more interestingly, maybe, how is the world and the current administration's support for Israel's war in Gaza, for example, influencing how Americans vote in this election? Many who would never vote for Trump won't vote for Harris either, seeing her as an extension of the president they call Genocide Joe. So what then? Our guest on this episode is an interviewer, debater, an insider and outsider in the United States, and a man who sure knows how to argue. You've probably seen him grill guests, particularly Trump officials, on Al Jazeera English, MSNBC, or his new outlet, Zeteo. I know Mehdi Hasan doesn't want Donald Trump to win the election, but up next, I'll ask him what happens if he does. This is the interview. Mehdi Hasan joins us now in the interview. Great to have you on the program. Thanks so much for joining us. How are you doing?
I'm good, Imran. Good to see you after a long time. Yeah. And thank you for A, pronouncing Zeteo correctly, shameless plug, Zeteo, and B, insider and outsider is a great description. I like that description of me.
And for not pronouncing your name as Mehdi Hasan, but we'll forgive them. So Mehdi, it's a big election. You're not a fan of Trump. What happens if he does win?
It's a great question, Imran. It's a question that not enough people are asking, right? We're so obsessed in the day-to-day. You said it well in your intro. We're so obsessed with the polls and who's up and who's down and what's being said right now and who's to blame and what's the strategy and which focus groups are saying what and did Harris campaign correctly in Michigan? We're not actually asking a pretty big question, which is if the polls are to be believed and it's neck and neck and Trump seems to have momentum right now, then Donald J. Trump could be president again on January 20th, 2025. What does that mean for the United States? What does that mean for democracy? What does that mean for minorities living in the US? What does that mean for Palestinians in Gaza, Lebanese, Iranians? Not enough people are asking the question. So I thank you for asking the question. I think it's going to be a nightmare of epic proportions. I think people have become inured to Trump. They've become complacent about the Trump threat. Imran, you've lived in the US. You know that Americans are like goldfish. Everyone here is an amnesiac. We can't remember what happened last week, let alone last year, let alone 4 years away. So the Trump presidency has been somehow memory hold. People tell me stuff like, well, we survived Trump once. Well, actually, many people did not survive Trump one, including pandemic victims and people in places like Afghanistan and Yemen. So I do think it will be super bad. I think Trump 2 will make Trump 1 look like a walk in the park. And I don't think people are quite prepared for what's coming down the track. Not just Trump, Imran, but the people around him.
Okay, so what's your biggest worry when it comes to the United States vis-a-vis the world? Let's make this a game of two halves. Look at the world first and then the domestic issues after that. What's your biggest fear?
I mean, my biggest fear is that he takes the Gaza genocide and escalates it even further than we've seen. One of the lines that has frustrated me on social media in recent weeks, people say to me, some in good faith, some in bad, Mehdi, how can it get any worse? You say it'll be worse under Trump. How can it get any worse? And I say, very easily. Things can always get worse. We've seen that throughout history. When people say it can't get worse in Gaza, I don't understand that because we've seen it get worse over the last year. We've seen it get worse over the last few weeks.
Yeah, but we've seen it get worse under Biden-Harris, right? So, I mean, their point is that you can't be double genocided, right? So
actually, you can, for example. The West Bank, for example, is somewhere that Donald Trump has his eye on. Miriam Adelson, Imran, who I'm sure you know, is the biggest donor to the Republicans right now, the widow of Sheldon Adelson, the casino magnate, hardcore anti-Palestinian, anti-Muslim, far-right Israeli American. She's given $100 million to Trump with the specific request that the annexation of the West Bank happens on Trump's watch. They are talking about wiping out Palestinians from the West Bank, not just from Gaza. So when people say what's worse than a genocide in Gaza, I would say a genocide in the West Bank. When people say what's worse than a war in Gaza and Lebanon, I say a war with Iran and the entire region. Things can always get worse, Imran. In 2000, Muslims voted for George W. Bush en masse. Vast majority of American Muslims voted for George W. Bush saying, well, we have to punish Al Gore. We don't want Joe Lieberman, the Zionist, as a vice president. Things can't get any worse than Bill Clinton and what's happened over the last 8 years. Well, we got the Iraq War. We got Afghanistan. We got Guantanamo Bay. We got black sites. Things got much worse. Sadly, I'm the party pooper who's here to tell you that things can always get worse. And with Donald Trump, however bad you think it is, it's always going to be one step worse. I don't think anyone imagined how bad Trump himself would be 4 years on. The Trump we're seeing right now is even worse than the Trump who left office inciting an insurrection. This is a guy who just shut down the town of Springfield, Ohio recently with bomb threats because he made up lies about immigrants there. This is a guy who's making the most outrageously racist white supremacist statements. He uses Palestinian as a racist pejorative, right? He says Joe Biden's a Palestinian, Chuck Schumer's a Palestinian. They have a plan called Project Esther to shut down all pro-Palestinian activism in the United States. So I think there's going to be a real pressure on Trump from his base, from Christian evangelicals, from the Miriam Adelsons. I mean, the guy who's going to run Middle East policy for him is Jared Kushner, a man who is so close to Netanyahu that when Jared was a child, Netanyahu used to sleep in Jared's bed when he used to visit the family home, and Jared would go sleep in the basement. That's how close the Netanyahus and the Kushners are. So when people tell me it can't get any worse for the Palestinians, I say, sorry, we'll see in January 2025.
Okay, let's sort of double click on that for just a moment, maybe deconstruct it a bit. So you're famous on WhatsApp. I always get forwards of you. Your Oxford Union speech, I think, from all the brown uncles, always does the round every couple of months.
11 years old, we're still going strong.
But I'm not on Twitter anymore, but I do get sometimes your tweets or people interacting with you. Yeah. One that I actually got very recently was you versus Mohammed El-Kurd. And so there was an interesting exchange, and I won't go into too many of the details there. But again, to that point where you're saying it's going to get worse, and they're saying how much worse can it actually get. But part of their point is that, and Mohammed El-Kurd is a Palestinian activist and journalist, from occupied East Jerusalem. Part of their point is that, well, what's the alternative? Is the alternative the same administration that has given Netanyahu a blank check when it comes to carpet bombing Gaza? Yeah. So, I mean, you have to concede that they're making a good point. It's a two-party system. It's imperfect, but it's not as if someone like, I don't know. I mean, like, it's not as if you're offering somebody else who's coming in and saying, no, I'm going to put a stop to it.
And, right? and Imran, there's no concession to be made. I'm the one who's been saying that for a year. I mean, you have to be living on the moon if you follow this subject and say that I haven't been attacking Harris and Biden for a year. I spent my first column for The Guardian earlier this year. I also write for The Guardian. It was a piece telling Joe Biden he must end this war or he's going to lose the election. My second piece after Kamala Harris became the nominee was to say, if you don't break with Biden, you're going to lose. What's going to happen to you is what happened to Hubert Humphrey in 1968 when he took over from LBJ, refused to break with the president on Vietnam, and he lost. And I've been issuing that warning again and again and again. I just did a video recently for my show, Mehdi Unfiltered on Zeteo, where I told the vice president, if you lose, don't blame Muslims in Michigan, blame yourself, right? There's no doubt in my mind that the Democrats have screwed this up, that they're complicit in genocide, that the choice is a horrific choice, and that whoever you elect in November will carry on the killing of Palestinians. There's no debate about that. No one's pretending that Harris is good for Gaza. Not at all. She's had many opportunities to break from Biden. She has refused to do it, and it's been very disappointing to see. That said, the choice is a choice. As you said, it's a two-party system. People kind of come after me and have a go at me. Don't shoot the messenger. I didn't create the two-party system. I'm anti the two-party system. Imran, you know I'm from the UK, where we have a multi-party system. I'm from Europe, where people have coalition governments, where there's proportional representation. We don't have that in the US. We have a ridiculous electoral college that forces a two-party system that undermines any kind of third-party candidate, whether it's Jill Stein or Ross Perot.
Right.
And therefore, that is the choice. And people are getting mad at me simply because I'm pointing out the choice is binary. I can't do anything about the fact, Imran, that on January 20th, 2025, one of two people will be sworn in at the Capitol as president of the United States, Kamala Harris or Donald J. Trump. It won't be Jill Stein. It will be Donald Trump or Kamala Harris. Now, the position is, if you care about the people of Gaza, and AOC has made this point, Cori Bush has made this point, a bunch of House Democrats who are very pro-Palestinian. Their argument is, we believe it is easier for us to make demands, do activism, organize under a Democratic president. And given the fact that the only people in Congress who support a ceasefire and support an arms embargo are Democrats, by the way, zero Republicans have called for a ceasefire and arms embargo. It does make sense to say that the only vehicle where we have a chance of making a change is on that one side. The other side, it's game over. It's Donald Trump, it's Jared Kushner, it's Miriam Adelson, it's David Friedman, it's Speaker Mike Johnson, it's Ted Cruz, it's Tom Cotton, who says bounce rubble in Gaza. I mean, the Republican Party is a anti-Palestinian, anti-Arab, Islamophobic, white supremacist adjacent party. That is the reality. So I say to the Mohammed El-Kurds as well, in good faith, that I get it. We all want to punish the Democrats for complicity in the genocide. But we have to be honest about the fact that punishing the Democrats requires rewarding Trump and Kushner. And I'm not comfortable with rewarding Trump and Kushner.
I mean, and part of why they get so irritated is because it's similar to the Ralph Nader argument that was made many years ago, is that, well, your vote for Jill Stein, congratulations, it hands the presidency to Donald Trump. Do you believe it in those terms?
Not everywhere. So I've said this very explicitly. If you're not in a swing state, vote how you want. Stay at home, vote green, do whatever the hell you want. Write in a rock star's name. It doesn't matter. The US system is so dumb, Imran, and for your viewers watching globally, it is one of the dumbest democratic systems on earth. There is a ridiculous electoral college that doesn't reflect the popular vote. So Donald Trump was able to win in 2016, despite getting 3 million fewer votes than Hillary Clinton. There's that dumbness. And then there's the fact that everything is concentrated on a bunch of swing states. 6 to 7 swing states, but really 3 that really matter, which are Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. So basically the election comes down to 40,000, 50,000, 60,000 people in 3 states. If you're not in those 3 states, if you're not in the 5 or 6 or 7 swing states, if you're in the other 43 states, if you're in California, blue, New York, blue, Mississippi, red, Alabama, red, then vote how you want. Makes no difference. Vote green, vote your conscience. If you're in a swing state, the reality is that supporting Jill Stein does help Trump. And again, don't shoot the messenger. Those are not my words. Donald Trump says, I love Jill Stein because her votes all come from the other side. That's his words, not my words. So that's the reality. And Ralph Nader, by the way, great memory there, Imran. In 2000, I was a 21-year-old living in the UK. I supported Nader. I was an idealistic young lefty. I was like, Bush and Gore, they're both as bad as each other. Ralph Nader, yeah, let's protest the system. I wasn't an American voter at the time. But from afar, Nader had my blessing. I now look back and say, if Al Gore had been elected in 2000, we wouldn't have invaded Iraq. We probably would have invaded Afghanistan. But the Iraq war and 500,000, 1 million Iraqi dead would not have happened. So I think we have to think about outcomes, right? I get the desire morally to punish Democrats, but I also care about outcomes.
Right. Okay. So former UK Foreign Secretary Lord Owen did an interview with Al Jazeera very recently, saying that if Trump becomes president, there's quite likely to be a deal in Ukraine. So there'll be an end to the war. Maybe they'll give Russia a sliver of Ukraine, or maybe even a third of Ukraine, and there'll be a ceasefire and an end to the war. And in that sense, appealing to the idea that Trump is always looking to cut a deal. That's very different to what you were saying about, say, Bush trying to remodel the Middle East with his ideological, if you like, crusade, in quotation marks. This idea that Trump might not be the maniac or the monster that you imagine. Yeah, sure, he's a narcissist, but he also would love to take the credit for making a deal. And why wouldn't he when it comes to Israel and Palestine as well?
Yeah. So let's just talk about Ukraine very briefly. I'm in favor of a negotiated end to the Ukraine war because I don't believe that either side can win. Having said that, I do support the people of Ukraine against an illegal invader and occupier. I try and be morally consistent. I support Palestinians under occupation. I support Ukrainians under illegal occupation. And I think too many people have given Putin a pass on this. I don't think Donald Trump should be the man overseeing a deal because it will be a deal that is pro-Putin. We know that Donald Trump has had secret conversations with Putin since leaving office. We know that Elon Musk, according to the Wall Street Journal this week, is having secret conversations with Putin. These are not people who are neutral or who are standing up to Vladimir Putin. And I think Vladimir Putin is a threat to the international order, international system. Again, I can't be a hypocrite. I'm against people who invade other countries, regardless of whether regardless of whether they're supporters of the US or not. So I don't think Donald Trump is the right man to do that deal because I think he will throw Ukraine under the bus. Again, we talk about Donald Trump as if he's one person. It's an administration, Imran. It's a political party. The Republican Party as a whole is so pro-Putin, it's scary. And they want to throw the Ukrainians under the bus, and I'm not willing to do that. That's point one. Point two, on Gaza and Israel, would he want a deal? Well, again, how we've memory hold Trump. He did a bunch of deals in office. He did the Abraham Accords, which some would argue led to October the 7th. Hamas, some would argue, did October the 7th to try and undermine the Abraham Accords and undermine a Saudi-Israel rapprochement. The Abraham Accords were all about cutting the Palestinians out and having dictators do a deal with the Israeli government, right? Not for the interests of the people, but for the interests of the dictatorships and the Israeli government. That was the deal he did. We've memory hold it. He also proposed a plan. Again, people completely forget this, didn't get much coverage. The Trump administration released a plan for quote unquote peace. It involved legalizing all of the illegal settlements. It involved giving Israel extra land in Gaza. It involved removing Palestinians from land that they currently inhabit. That was the deal. Jared Kushner is not going to give a deal that helps the Palestinian people. He was the man appointed by Trump to do a deal. And I just say one thing to people who have this kind of naive, optimistic view of Trump. If Trump is going to be the guy who's going to be reasonable and anti-war and do a deal, why is it the worst people in the Israeli government want Trump? Why does Itamar Ben-Gvir say, if Trump's president, we'll be able to do whatever we want? Why does Amichai Chikli, the diaspora affairs minister, say, I'm voting for Trump, I'm endorsing Trump? Why does Netanyahu clearly, in his recent trip to Mar-a-Lago, want Trump? I mean, if Netanyahu and Ben-Gvir and Smotrich, all these guys want Trump, that should set off some alarm bells as to what he wants. And I don't know if you saw the clip last week, Imran, where Trump came out openly and said, Biden's holding Netanyahu back. He should be doing the reverse. Netanyahu's doing a great job. So 42,000 people dead, at least, 16,000 kids minimum. And Trump thinks Netanyahu's been held back. And then people say to me, it can't get any worse. Well, Trump is telling us it's going to get worse.
So Obama's said that Trump is a wannabe dictator. Kamala Harris has used the big F word, fascist. That word has now entered the discourse in the build-up to the election, in a way similar to 2016. So let me try and remember. Mark Milley, former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, in Bob Woodward's new book, he's mentioned the word fascist. John Kelly, his former chief of staff, Trump's former chief of staff, he's used the word fascist. He said Trump's a fascist. So we have this. We even have Robert Paxton, the historian of fascism, New York Times interview. Initially, he was on the fence. Oh, the word's overused. I study Vichy France, and he's like, no, actually, it looks like fascism now. But this is the interesting thing. You read the New York Times, and everybody sort of feels validated and says, of course, of course, of course. But does this really turn the dial? Doesn't this only, in a way, there's a sort of diminishing returns that takes place here, where the more the word is used and the bigger the word, the less likely the base is to listen to you, because they're like, yeah, of course, sour grapes. You guys just hate our guys. Like, how much of a difference does it make calling Trump a fascist, no matter how strong your argument is?
It's a great question. I would say a couple of things first, though. You said that Obama calls him a wannabe dictator. Let's be clear. Trump says he's going to be a dictator. You don't need to quote liberals. I often have people say, oh, this is Trump derangement. No, this is Trump's own words. Somebody said to me recently, stop talking about Hitler. I'm not. Trump is the one praising Hitler. Trump has said, I'll be dictator. I'll be a dictator for a day. And Imran, we of course know that all dictators are only ever dictators for 24 hours and they happily give up power. He said that. His chief of staff has said he's a fascist. His former top general says fascist to the core. These are not Democrats. These are not liberals. These are small C conservative generals, Marine general. So this is not liberal derangement. And yes, Robert Paxton said he's not a fascist until he saw January the 6th and said, oh, wait, he just incited an insurrection with armed militias. That's fascism. So it is an issue. I take your point about diminishing returns, but that's always been the way Trump wins, right, Imran? He does crazy stuff. We point out it's crazy, and then everyone says it becomes normalized. And then everyone says, well, it just helps Trump. What are the rest of us supposed to do, Imran? You're a journalist. I'm a journalist. Our job is not to get people elected or not elected. Our job is to say the truth as we see it. So when people say to me, oh, you're just going to upset people, antagonize people by saying fascist, I'm like, that's not my problem. I'm not running for office. I have an honesty and a duty to my viewers and listeners and subscribers and followers to say what's happening. What's happening is the rise of fascism. I do think the diminishing returns is partly a problem that people have come late to this. I first used the F word on MSNBC in July of 2020 during the George Floyd protests, where we now know Trump was telling his team behind the scenes, open fire on the protesters, shoot them. And his team said, we can't do that, Mr. President. By the way, that team, they won't be there next time around. It'll be a bunch of sycophants who say, yes, sir, we'll open fire. But I used it over 4 years ago. I wish more people had said it earlier. The people who might listen are the swing voters who still value democracy in America, maybe. I do think the biggest problem, Imran, actually, is not his followers who say, oh, this is all sour grapes. I get it. They have to say that. The really worrying sign, Imran, is the people who say, yeah, he is a dictator. We want a dictator. Yeah. We want someone. I don't know if you saw Tucker Carlson's comments a couple of days ago. He talked about Trump is the dad, the father, daddy, who comes home and takes a belt and beats his daughter. We are the daughter who needs beating. This is the kind of language they're using on the right currently. They are desperate for an authoritarian. And Imran, you are not in the US right now. Your audience, global audience. America is not immune from global fascistic authoritarian trends. Around the world right now, there are many people who are craving a strong man, to give them certainty in an age of uncertainty. Right. And I would say at least 20 to 30% of Americans probably fall in that basket.
And part of the reason why many people are craving that daddy is because there's a culture war taking place. Yeah. And that probably underpins the rise of some of these influencers that are emerging online with massive followings and so on. So you've got US power declining. It's a superpower, but maybe not for much longer. And you've got a culture war happening within the US. How would you define that culture war, which is the backdrop to this election?
So yeah, I'm uncomfortable with the culture war framing because it implies there's two equal sides who have picked a fight. And I know that's what the right want you to believe. But actually, a lot of this is simply right-wing grievance mongering as a way of distracting from the fact that the conservative agenda is hugely unpopular in America. Americans don't want tax cuts for billionaires. Americans do want universal health care. America doesn't want government subsidies for corporations. The United States does not want to, as much as they're worried about immigration, most Americans don't want racist policies towards immigrants, didn't want child separation at the border. And I think it's really important to understand that what we've seen over the last 4 years, what color is that, what boots is the green M&M wearing? What does Mr. Potato Head look like? All this, is Dr. Seuss being censored? Are college kids too left wing? All this crap that we're getting is a bunch of right wingers cynically, strategically, ruthlessly, relentlessly pushing quote unquote culture wars arguments as a way of distracting from the fact that they have nothing to offer white working class voters in quote unquote left behind areas. Like the people who vote for Trump, who are from the poorer demographics, less educated demographics, they're not getting anything material in return. I mean, Imran, you saw the Donald Trump stunt the other day in the closed down McDonald's, where he handed out fries and burgers to people and said, wow, genius, this is blue collar Donald Trump. But at the McDonald's, a reporter asked him, do you support raising the minimum wage? That's all that matters, right? Everything else is just a photo op. Policy, do you support raising the minimum wage? Trump dodged it because he doesn't support raising the minimum wage. The Republican Party does not support raising the minimum wage. So when you have a group of people who are not going to benefit financially, materially, educationally from a Trump presidency, all they're going to get is owning the libs, right? Is pissing off the New York Times, is making those latte drinking, sandal wearing East Coast liberals angry. That's why we're voting Trump, to really annoy them, which is great. Like that'll give them some short-term high, but they're not going to be able to put their kids through college. They're not going to be able to get healthcare for themselves or their parents. This is the reality, right? This is why people at right-wingers have always fought culture wars, to distract from the fact that their economic and political agenda is fundamentally anti-democratic, fundamentally plutocratic and oligarchic, and fundamentally unpopular with the mass of American people. Republicans, as much as Democrats, want higher taxes on the rich, want health care for everyone. That's what Trump won't tell you.
I wanted to talk about J.D. Vance and the culture wars through that lens, but we don't have time because his memo was great. Many liberals fawned over him, and then he got absorbed into Trumpism. That idea of the Appalachian sort of poor white community and all of that. Yeah, it's fascinating. Anyway, but we don't have time. So I'm going to ask you one final question. Let's use Trump as our common thread, say 2016, 2020, 2024, and your journey in the US, as I say, outside, insider, inside, outsider. You covered this, and the culture war gets played out through the media. So you covered this through MSNBC, The Intercept, Al Jazeera English, now your own media outlet, Zeteo. What was the major difference between all of those, or even if it's just working for the man or someone else versus your own thing in covering Trump, in covering the situation in the US?
I think whether you're covering Trump, whether you're covering Gaza, whether you're covering oligarchy, I think the fundamental problem is whether you're at corporate media, whether you're at Al Jazeera, and I still do a show for Al Jazeera as a contributor, the fundamental problem with all these places, and why I've enjoyed running my own company this year, and freedom's never tasted so good, is there is a caution, Imran, and you know this. There is a caution amongst big media organizations. And sometimes that caution is justifiable, right? There's a journalistic duty to be careful in what you're saying, what language you're using, what facts you're putting forward. I totally get it and I respect it. I'm not one of these people who says, burn it all down. I hate corporate media. No, there's a role for all different media organizations. But there are gaps. And one big gap is, where are people willing to say the unsayable? Where are people willing to be, the kid with the emperor's new clothes and point out the emperor's naked? right? We need people to be able to say what's obviously in front of our eyes, whether it's saying the G word, genocide, which a lot of corporate media won't say, whether it's saying the F word, fascism, which a lot of media folks will not say. And I think for me, that has been the most important part. You introduced me at the top as someone who likes to debate and argue. And that has always been a frustration where I've worked at other places. I've appreciated all the platforms I had and continue to have. I write for The Guardian. I do a show for Al Jazeera English. But fundamentally, Zeteo is where I can really just speak freely. I don't have to worry about checking with anyone above me. I don't have to look over my shoulder. I don't have to worry about some, inane, rules or restrictions. We get to really exercise free speech. And I think that is vitally important at a time when people are feeling cowed and bullied and pressured and intimidated. I think that is what Zeteo gives me and gives us.
Okay. Mehdi Hasan, you're a force of nature. It's been good to talk to you. Thanks so much for joining us on the interview.
Great conversation, Imran. Appreciate it.
Take care.